Welcome to the second PowerPoint of week 10. This is on evolution, and there is Charles Darwin. This is a great PowerPoint, and it's going to show you how things have progressed over millions of years to where we are now. All right, let's get on with things. Evolution is defined as the change in the inherited traits in a population of organisms over time. Ecology describes how organisms live in their environment. Ecology and evolution are related in that evolution is the consequence of ecology over time. Interesting. A single organism does not evolve because each individual is born with the DNA that they acquire from the process of reproduction. Individuals can adapt to some environmental changes, such as increasing RBC production at higher altitudes when oxygen concentrations are lower. Evolution involves passing on different alleles to offspring, such as blood types A versus blood types O. And you remember there, those alleles there, those are sequences of DNA that code for a particular protein. Adaptation involves changing the regulation of expression of certain genes. So you see here, all organisms have the capacity to overproduce. Ensures that some will survive any given environment. Only a limited number of these offspring actually survive and produce the next generation. So you'll see here overproduction. Okay, these are turtles here, and maybe only one or two of these turtles will actually make it to adulthood for reproducing. Through sexual reproduction and genetic variation over many generations, new combinations of traits continually emerge within all populations. Darwin coined the phrase survival of the fittest, which means that individuals that are born with traits that are most beneficial for that particular environment will survive, will reproduce, and most assuredly pass on their DNA to the next generation. The fittest does not necessarily mean biggest or strongest. Predator-prey relationships act on selection pressures and cause natural selection to occur in both the predator and the prey. Genetic variation exists in individuals in a population. Different alleles for the same gene. DNA changes that occur in the gametes, sperm and egg or spore or pollen, are passed on to the offspring. All populations produce more offspring than will survive, even humans. The more will ensure that the species goes on. The offspring that survive have DNA that allows them to survive in their present environment for sure. Those offspring will survive to reproduce, and they will also end up with DNA changes that may or may not be present in their germ cells. Over long periods of time, a population will gradually change. This is called microevolution. Okay? Small changes within a population over time. This is what we call microevolution. Giraffes' necks grow longer. Macroevolution, large-scale changes that gives rise to a new species, molecules to people. All right, so you see the difference there. Microevolution, we're dealing with one aspect of a creature. Macroevolution, we're dealing with all over a large period of time. Darwin did not invent the idea of evolution. Prior to Darwin, there was no consensus among biologists about the mechanism causing evolution. A predecessor to Darwin, Lamarck, proposed that evolution occurred by the inheritance of acquired characteristics. And according to Lamarck, individuals passed on their offspring onto their offspring the body and behavioral changes that acquired during their lives. For example, giraffes evolved long necks because ancestral giraffes tended to stretch their necks, and this neck extension was passed on to the next generation. Okay. And you'll see right here, right? Evolutionary early giraffes were shorter, and then as time went on, the necks grew, and it was advantageous because the giraffes with the longer necks could survive. These ones here, they died out. That's how we know that that was a good evolutionary change, because these guys here survived, these guys here did not. We don't see any giraffes with short necks. According to Darwin, the variation is not created by experience, but already exists when selection acts upon it. Populations of ancestral giraffes contain variations in neck length. Individuals who were able to feed higher up on the trees had more food, and so were able to survive and reproduce better than their shorter necked relatives. We now know that only DNA changes in the gametes affect offspring. Epigenetics. New information recently shows that some gene regulation changes that occur in people can be passed on to their children. So some genes are up or down regulated based on their environment, and their children can also have the same regulation. So Lamarck wasn't as far off as people thought. Okay, so these genes here can be upregulated or downregulated depending upon their environment, how badly they are needed. A specific example of microevolution in bacteria involves antibiotic resistance. This is an extremely important healthcare concern. Bacteria can reproduce every 30 minutes or 20 minutes or so in perfect conditions, and therefore can have a very rapid generation time. Antibiotics kill most, but not all bacteria in any given population, making antibiotics a selection pressure. Some bacteria have antibiotic resistance genes that allow them to survive in the presence of antibiotics. These bacteria are the fittest in an environment where the antibiotics occur. And you'll see here, original population, and then you'll see low resistance to high, and you'll see what's going on here, the final population. Most of them there are antibiotic resistance. This is a good example of microevolution. Artificial selection, okay? And sorry for these are a little stretched, but you'll see here the whole idea. You see pugs. These things, man, these dogs cannot survive on their own. They're a man-made, human-made, created dog that cannot survive on its own. It's what we call artificial selection. And I'll show you this right now. Okay. Domesticated animals evolved through selective breeding for certain traits that breeders preferred. The resulting difference between breeds of domesticated species are more extreme than what exists in nature. Darwin termed this form of selection artificial selection because breeders determine which traits will be successful rather than nature. And that's the thing. These pugs, if you put them out into nature, they would be extinct in a day. But because they live with humans, there's this artificial selection, so this dog breed continues to this day. Macroevolution. Darwin's finches are a closely related group of distinct species. All the birds are similar to each other except for the shape of their bills. Genetic differences account for the physical differences in their beaks. Birds with larger beaks make more of a protein called BMP4. And you'll see there the difference there in their beaks. Okay? Beak shape changed over time depending on the type of food available. Birds with bigger beaks could survive during drier seasons when only larger, hardier seeds were available, or if the smaller seeds became harder to find. During the wet season, the birds with smaller beaks were more able to eat smaller seeds, and the proportion of small beaks increased in the population. Gradualism refers to evolutionary changes that occur extremely slowly. Such changes would be nearly imperceptible from generation to generation, but would accumulate over the course of millions of years. Okay, this is just two examples there of macroevolution, gradualism, and then we have punctuated equilibrium. Okay, refers to how species experienced long periods of little or no evolutionary change. Stasis, interrupted by bursts of evolutionary change. Okay, so there's gradualism, and then there's punctuated equilibrium, where things can change on a dime. Crocodiles existed about 230 million years ago. The most primitive fish, the hagfish, still exists today after 500 million years. Yeah, this is here, you're talking when the dinosaurs roamed. So these are dinosaurs, the remnants of. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. The oceans formed about 3.8 billion years ago. Prokaryotes first appeared about 3.5 billion years ago. Eukaryotes about 2 billion years later. Multicellular organisms about 1 billion years ago, and fish and higher level creatures about 500 million years ago. Okay. Amphibians, you'll see the timelines there for insects, dinosaurs, mammals, primates, and now we're into the last on the evolutionary clock there. Evolutionary clock, we're down into the nitty gritty here. Hominids, human beings, first appeared about 2 million years ago. Homo sapiens, even closer, about 200,000. Okay, and you'll see here, I wouldn't ask you any of these, Homo habilis and also the, Homo sapien and all this, just to show you there, though, that there is a relatedness. Okay. Fossil records, anatomical records, molecular records. These prove evidence that earlier creatures did exist, right? So fossils are the most direct evidence of evolution. Fossils contain calcium and will not be degraded by microorganisms. Bones will mineralize and form rock. Most fossils are skeletons, but they can also be feathers, scales, hooves, horns, teeth, shells, all these kinds of things. If something is encased in tree sap and amber, it can be perfectly preserved, like in Jurassic Park. Fossilization is rare. Conditions must be perfect. This is why our fossil record is very incomplete. Okay. There is no doubt that species have changed throughout time, but it can't be shown conclusively that one species came directly from another. It's just a theory, this whole idea of evolution. Fossils give a sequential picture of evolution for many species, but this is rare due to the scarcity of fossils. And just a human evolution over time, and we call this bipedal locomotion. You'll see Homo sapiens there at the end. This is our human history. Another way to determine evolution there is anatomical structures. All vertebrate embryos have what we call pharyngeal pouches. Okay, and you'll have a look here. The whole idea, a cat, human, a bat, a whale, all has these 5 fingers. Okay, we all have some similarities. Okay. Molecular record. There are similarities in the macromolecules of species, mainly protein and DNA sequences. With DNA sequencing technology, this could become the most powerful tool for determining evolutionary patterns. Absolutely. Population genetics. This is where different traits exist in a population in varying frequencies. Hardy and Weinberg studied the frequency of genes in a gene pool approximately 50 years after Darwin. If the proportion of a genotype remained constant from generation to generation, they are in the Hardy-Weinberg equation, but no evolution. So, no mutations, natural selection, or migration. Large population, same number of offspring per individual, generations are non-overlapping. And this is the formula. I won't ask this of you, but this will show you some examples here of how this works. In a population, there are 1,000 mice. What is the frequency of black mice and white mice if 600 have black fur and 400 have white fur? Remember the difference between genotype and phenotype? Answer: the frequency of black-haired mice is 6 divided by 1,000, right? 600 divided by 1,000, so 60% will have black hair, 40% will have white hair. Okay, makes sense, right? You're just dividing the number by the total. Knowing the frequency of the phenotype, you can calculate the frequency of the genotype and alleles in a population. The dominant allele is designated P. The recessive allele is designated Q. If there are only 2 alleles for a trait in a population, then P plus Q is equal to 1. Therefore, all combinations of genotype possible in the population add up to 100%. So, let's take this a step forward then. For all of the possible genotypes, you have a look here. Okay, this is dominant, right? So here, double B would be homozygous dominant, which would be P squared. And here we have heterozygous, big B, small b, which would be PQ, heterozygous. And then we have homozygous recessive, small b, that would be Q squared, homozygous recessive, and you'll see what we get. So there's your homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive. Here are your heterozygous, okay, all adding up to 1. Therefore, all combinations of genotypes possible in the population will add up to 1. So you'll see here, there's your big B, heterozygous, homozygous, it all adds up. The following 5 factors can alter the proportion of homozygotes and heterozygotes enough to produce significant deviation from the Harvey-Weinberg prediction. And so the Harvey-Weinberg prediction is just a tool there to estimate and guesstimate what's going to go on in the population. But there are different things that can happen. And you'll remember there that right in here, these things here cannot happen in order for a Hardy-Weinberg frequency distribution to happen. And you'll see them here. Selection, mutation, non-random mating, migration, and genetic drift. We'll have a look at all these right here. So you've got selection. Natural selection can be divided into 3 categories. There is stabilizing, disruptive, and directional. And you'll see them right here. Okay? The dotted red line indicates the original population. Okay? The dotted red line indicates the original population, and the blue solid line shows the changes in the population after a particular selection pressure has occurred. So you'll have stabilizing, disruptive, and directional. Okay, so here's your directional. So you'll see what's going on here. Before the stressor has happened, you'll see that the population is moving in this direction away from where it used to be. Okay, then you have a stabilizing population. Okay, and you'll see what's going on here. So before selection, and you'll see it just reinforces in and around the mean, stabilizing the population. And then we have what's called disruptive selection, okay, where we have an attack to the majority of the individuals, leaving us only with the extreme on this side and the extremes on this side. So it's highly disruptive to a population. So there's three different kinds of selection that can happen within a particular population. They can be good or they can be very bad. Mutation is a change in a nucleotide sequence in DNA. We've talked about these there in the previous week 10 PowerPoint. Okay, point mutation. The mutation rates are generally too low to significantly alter the Hardy-Weinberg proportion in a short period of time. Mutations must affect the DNA of the gametes or the mutation will not be passed on to the offspring. Okay? However, no matter how rare, a mutation is the ultimate source of variation in a population long term. So, we think of mutations as bad things, and generally they are. But mutations can bring about great change in a population and enhances survival. Okay. Non-random mating. Okay, lions, elks, elephants, seahorses, the whole idea. Okay. They have to mate within their own population. Okay. Migration is the movement of individuals between population. Okay. The magnitude of the effect of migration is based on two factors: the number of migrants in the population and the difference in allele frequencies between the migrant and original population. If a population is going to stay a population, it needs to only mingle with its own. It can't start mingling with another population. Genetic drift. Environmental changes can cause genetic variation too. It's called the bottleneck effect. And you'll see here that you have your parent population, and then you have your bottleneck, drastic reduction in the population. So maybe something happened here in this population. A whole bunch of them died, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of red and not as many blue, but there's more reds than blue. And you'll see there that maybe these are the only individuals that survived. Maybe there was a landslide. Maybe something happened. And you'll see there that the majority of these are now blue with a little bit of red. And you'll see there that the next generation, we've completely altered it. You'll see what goes on here. We call this there genetic drift. So due to some type of environmental change, okay, we've drastically altered the available alleles within the population. Okay, and great presentation. I love it. That's on evolution. You know, we could spend years talking about it, but hopefully there you guys took a little bit away from that. And thank you so much. We'll see you for the next PowerPoint. Take care. Be well.